Okay, the reading from Emmett Fox for January 22nd. We have always said that the golden key is simple, and so it is. But of course, it's not always easy to turn. If you are very frightened or worried, it may be difficult at first to get your thoughts away from material things. But by constantly repeating some statement of absolute truth that appeals to you, such as, there is no power but God, or I am a child of God, filled and surrounded by the perfect peace of God, or God is love, or God is guiding me now, or perhaps best and simplest of all, just God is with me. You will soon find that your mind is clearing. Do not struggle. Be quiet but insistent. Each time that you find your attention wandering, just switch it straight back to God. Do not try to think out in advance what the solution of your difficulty will probably turn out to be. This is technically called outlining and will only delay the demonstration. Leave the question of ways and means to God. You want to get out of your difficulty. That is sufficient. You do your half, and God will never fail to do his. Whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered.
So today, I'm going to talk about modern Samaritanism, or perhaps I should have written it, the title is Modern Good Samaritanism. I happened on two different articles this week, actually last week, about doing good to those who are strangers in our midst. And it reminded me of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I'm actually going to read that so that we're all on the same page. This is from the Lamsa translation. And it's Luke 10:30-37. Jesus said to him, there was a man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and the bandits attacked him and robbed him and beat him and left him with little life remaining in him. And they went away. And it chanced a priest was going down that road and saw him and passed on. And likewise, a Levite came and arrived at that place and saw him and passed on. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. And he came to him and bound up his wounds and poured on them wine and oil, and he put him on his own ass and brought him to the inn and took care of him. And in the morning he took out 2 pennies, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him. Whatever you spend more when I return, I will give it to you. Who, therefore, of these three appears to you to be became the neighbor to him who fell into the hands of bandits? He said, the one who had compassion on him. Now, it will help to understand who a priest is. That's obvious. They're talking Hebraic priests. A Levite is another temple person, highly regarded, supposed to be special, taking care of temple duties. And a Samaritan is a no good son of a bitch. The Jews hated Samaritans. They regarded them as worthless bastards, basically. Background being that when King Nebuchadnezzar conquered the area, his process for assuring peace, that nobody rose against him, was just as Russia's trying to do with Ukraine now. He destroyed the people who were there, carted them off to somewhere else, so that the only people remaining in the area that is called Samaria were the elderly, the infirm, and a few scribes who were left behind to take care of them till they died. Well, the scribes married whomever Nebuchadnezzar moved in to that area to repopulate it. They still regarded themselves as Hebrews, but their religious practices, faith practices, modified since they were marrying people from other cultures. And the Jews if they traveled, would go way out of their way to avoid traveling through some area where those no good bastards were. Except for Jesus. Jesus traveled through Samaria, and some of the parables we have, some of the writings we have about him are about dealings he had with Samaritans. He was not holding against them who they were. He treated them equally. So looking at that, we can say two people of a much respected religion were willing to let a beat up guy die. And a guy who was regarded as dirt by them did what we would expect someone who loves and cares on behalf of God would do. Now, let's sort of a sidebar. Let's look at the metaphysical definition as Unity presents it. The leading characteristics of the Samaritan are kind-heartedness, helpfulness, and generosity. He typifies the traits that make religion a living, spiritual, uplifting power. The activities of these spiritual qualities are the stepping stones that lead to great demonstration. Demonstration being creating good, bringing things to pass in this world. Well, as Emmett Fox talks about. They are the forces that throw wide open the doors of the inner kingdom so that man's consciousness may be lifted up and merged with God consciousness. And then the quote, "Go thou and do likewise." The master was saying to all who wish to triumph over the last enemy, to all who would seek to attain eternal life. So the two principal lessons set forth in Jesus' parable are, one, that we keep the law of eternal life by loving God. Two, that we keep this law by expressing love for our neighbor. Now, metaphysically, a man's neighbor is his nearest and most intimate embodied thought. So the body is our nearest and most embodied thought. Therefore, the body is our neighbor. In other words, if you're going to be a good Samaritan, you need to be taking care of your body because it is representative of the rest of the earth too. So looking at this range of thought, let me read some pieces from a couple of the articles as a way of exploring what we might be considering or need to consider in terms of Samaritan work. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying that what these two are talking about are necessarily where each of you is going to be called to care for another. But I think this is what they're saying here is worthy of thought in terms of where does each of us need to go? What does each of us need to do? So the title of the first one was Opening Your Home to a Stranger Fleeing War. And it was from uexpress.com. Last spring, a Ukrainian woman's post in a Facebook group caught Grace Cohen's eye. Cohen, a 28-year-old graphic designer in the St. Louis area, had been following the news about the war in Ukraine and researching ways she might be able to help. She learned that Americans could sponsor someone from Ukraine if they agreed to house and support the individual for 2 years. Soon after, Cohen saw a Facebook post from Anastasia Kabanchuk, a 24-year-old English translator whose parents sent her to Poland a few weeks after Russia attacked Ukraine. Quote, "I can't stay here in Poland for long, so right now I'm looking for a sponsor to help me move to the USA," end quote, she wrote. Cohen discussed the idea with her fiancé. He was on board. So she commented on Kabanchuk's post, "Hey, I'm in St. Louis. Message me if you're interested in staying with me." The two women talked via video call the next day. By the end of the conversation, they seemed like a good match for the sponsor program. Now, the background, just before Russia invaded last year, Kabanchuk's parents told her that she needed to go stay with her friends in Poland. She refused to leave her parents behind. But when the Russians targeted nuclear power plants in March, her mother said Anastasia was leaving for Poland the next day. They found a bus ticket. It was time to say goodbye. Do not worry, do not cry, her mother said to her. Her mom said the separation would last likely just a week. Her father said he wanted her to be safe. She tried her best not to cry. It took 12 hours to get to the Polish border, then another 14 hours to cross it. Her bus was just one of dozens, all filled with Ukrainians leaving. Since the Russian invasion began, more than 12 million Ukrainians have fled their homes, including 5 million who've left the country. Once she was in Poland, Kavanchuk's family friends picked her up and drove her to their home a few hours away. Her week-long stay ended up lasting 5 months. Cohen, an only child like Kavanchuk, grew up in Missouri. When she was in elementary school, she remembers her mom, Lori, passing a homeless person on a street corner while driving home. As soon as they arrived home, her mother made a sandwich, put together a box meal, and drove it back to the man and gave it to him. It made such a big impression on me, Cohen said. She was the kindest, most generous person I've ever met. Her mother was diagnosed with melanoma and died when Cohen was 17. Her father, Victor, worked as a real estate agent and landlord. He would often go out of his way to find shelter for someone in need. His parents had fled from Poland before World War II. He was fighting leukemia when he caught COVID-19 2 years later. He didn't survive the virus. Losing both her parents made Cohen realize how much it meant to grow up in a loving and safe environment. She knows her parents would have supported her decision to sponsor a person displaced by war. She says, I often imagine what it would have been like to be a Jew during World War II, and how I would have hoped someone would be generous enough to shelter or hide me. Her decision to take in Kavanchuk felt like a way to honor her parents. So that's one individual story of finding someone who figuratively has been beaten up and left by the side of the road. Then Rabbi Miriam Turlinchamp in the Inquirer did an op-ed, We Must Open Our Arms to Asylum Seekers. And she talked about visiting the southern border here. And she writes, in the detention facilities, shelters, and advocacy centers on both the Mexican and American sides of the border, I heard countless stories of assault, kidnapping, and famine, the price of liberation paid through trauma and exploitation. I had the same question of everyone I met, the warden at the detention center, the lead teacher at a shelter for unaccompanied minors, the immigration attorney, and the midwife at a family processing center. What gives you hope? Every single one answered the same way. The work, doing their best with what's right in front of them. And she goes on to explain, in the Jewish tradition, our sacred texts teach us, you shall not stand idly by. And then she goes on to ask, well, what does that mean when the work seems never ending? Not just on a flooded border, but also in our own lives, flooded with our own needs and priorities. When I am looking at something that feels impossible, I try to find something, however small, to do. Something, anything. And sometimes that's all we can do, make a difference in the lives of others who are right in front of us. It may not change policy or the system or even the trajectory of a person's life, but it does change the moment. I fully believe that acts of generosity and compassion are what keep our souls alive, particularly when hope is hard to find. Now, as I reflected on that which I've just read to you, it seemed to me that this is a key challenge that we face in our personal growth. In the Christian tradition, the Jewish faith, the Islamic, Baha'i, and Sikh faiths, as I know them, we are each challenged to activate our spiritual walk in concrete actions. In other words, we are called to grow our internal spirituality and to demonstrate our understanding of divine love by who we are and what we do in this world. Even though we may regard ourselves as but small lights, our actions can change the world a little bit at a time.
So I'll have to.
So that's the base of where I am and the presentation. But I also wanted to move to another part, because it's possible to end up in a spiritual trap when you engage in Good Samaritanism. It involves the question of, why are you doing Good Samaritan-ish activities? Perhaps because it's this time in human history and economic philosophy, or perhaps it's always been this way. But it's so easy to think of our relationship with the divine as a contract. And if you hear various, well, Christian preachers, which is what I know best, so often they present it as, you say, you tithe, God's going to give it back to you, sort of thing. God will accept you, but only if you do this, or if you don't do this. So it's easy to fall in the trap of, if I do this good thing, then God's going to give me good in return, or I'm going to get good. A pure transactional approach. And as I understand the divine, that's not what it's about. That's not the way it works. Well, if we define it as working that way, then we've limited God, and that may be what we get. But think of the biblical Good Samaritan. There's no evidence, at least in the parable, that he rescued the almost dead man to get a reward. The almost dead man had everything robbed from him. He had nothing. It appears the Samaritan did it because he cared about the well-being of another person. Now think of that for a minute. He rescued a dying man simply because he cared about him. Didn't know him from Adam. Man had nothing to give him. But the man worked out of compassion. Wow. So here are some examples of answers to the why are you doing it that will tend to lead you farther from the divine path. Why? Because God will give me a tenfold return on my efforts. Why? Because I'll look good to others. Why? Because I'll feel better in myself. Yeah, but you don't want to take that. Those are false positive tests. Okay, so they may sound good, but they're not the divine, because as I understand the divine is just letting good flow to each one of us unless we object, because we exist, because we are in and of the divine. So I was sort of thinking it as I was writing this. Divine love flows to us as if we're at the bottom of a valley and the rain all heads toward us. We don't have to do anything to be worthy. We can take actions that will avoid that good coming to us, but those are our actions. Okay. And similarly, when we take action, are we doing it as the Good Samaritan in the parable from compassion? Or do we have an ulterior motive? Maybe even hidden from us. Whatever you find yourself called to do, whatever little piece or bigger piece, or maybe you'll find an opportunity with a megaphone. We don't know. But I encourage each of us to be open to find opportunities where we can emulate the Good Samaritan. And for the same compassionate, loving reasons. We are of God. God is in us. We are part of God's ongoing interactions in this earth, on this earth. in the mixture of all that is divine. And we can walk in that faith and be open to the places where the divine gives us an opportunity to bring good to another, whether it's another human, whether it's an animal, whether it's the geophysics of this earth itself. It's all one. It's all part of the loving frequency the divine has created. And let us have fun doing it together. Dear God, thank you for having blessed us this week, for having blessed us with breath, with sustenance, with your love, and with the love of those around us. Thank you for having blessed us with this community where we're able to share and pray and grow and love together. Watch over us as we depart from here. Help us to serve as good Samaritans in whatever way we can. Help us to understand when and how. Help us to grow further connected in you, through you, with you. And help us to return here again to this community where we can share and love and grow together. We thank you for all the good you've given, dear God, all the good that you're preparing to give, not only each and every one of us, but everyone in this world. We say thank you, thank you, thank you, and amen.